On the Vandy program today, we have a guest who has covered pro football for a while now, covers the 49ers, talks about, on his Last Man Standing pod, talks about all things about the survivor type things, which we'll get into in a moment. But, one of the people who is diving deep into all things related to the Dianna Russini and Mike Vrabel thing that's going on. I don't know what we want to call it, but our guest today is Tony Farmer. Tony, hello.
How's it going, man? Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Not a problem. You've stood out. I actually told a buddy over the weekend that we were going to chat, and he's like, "Man, he's been the person who is leading the charge on studying this Vrabel and Russini. I guess we'll call it affair, lowercase a. So why don't you give us kind of the background? The photos were published on April 7th, 2026, and then all heck broke loose afterwards. So maybe I guess we'll start with kind of an overview, elevator speech of what went on starting when the photos broke.
Yeah, those photos first came out really out of nowhere. April 6th or 7th, as you said, in Sedona, Arizona. Originally, TMZ didn't want the photos. They turned them down. They said, we don't want to police bedroom behavior, which to me doesn't sound very TMZ-like. It's funny when you hear an organization like that doesn't necessarily have the most strict editorial standards turn down a story like that, but they did for whatever reason. And then we just saw more photo dumps after that. Probably the most damning ones, in my opinion, were the photos from the New York City bar, dimly lit bar. It looked like there was some leaning in going on, perhaps for a kiss. Those were the big ones that came out shortly after that. And then there was the photos of Dianna Russini and Mike Vrabel renting a boat together in Tennessee. There were some other smaller photo drops, but those were really the three big ones. And the story here, for people that are wondering, is Mike Vrabel's a head coach in the NFL. He just won Coach of the Year, by the way. Dianna Russini has a long history of reporting on Mike Vrabel, back when he was with the Titans, now when he was with the Patriots, and Mike Vrabel just won Coach of the Year. So intertwined in this story with the alleged affair is also a whole bunch of other potential conflicts of interest. I mentioned the Coach of the Year angle, but then there's also did this impact her reporting? Shortly after the Sedona photos dropped, both Mike Vrabel and Dianna Russini made public statements. And those public statements were essentially denials. Mike Vrabel used the expression, "This is laughable, not worthy of further comment." Well, within a couple weeks, he commented further at some press conferences. So people were kind of skeptical of Mike after that. And then Dianna Russini, infamously sort of came out and denied things and said, the photos are unmoored from the facts and things like that. I'm paraphrasing. So there was a denial from her as well. The Athletic, her employer, originally supported her and said essentially there were more people there. These photos are taken out of context. Again, I'm paraphrasing, but they had a very strong support for her, and then did a quick U-turn and said, actually, we're going to look into this. And once they started investigating it, that's when Dianna Russini decided that she was going to resign from the Athletic. And she did cite the Athletic's investigation. She mentioned it in her public announcement about the resignation. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, but it's really spawned into something much bigger than even what I just described. There's so many different angles and different ways you can look at it.
Yeah, and one of the angles I wanted to talk about, and I got a page of notes because
It's a big one.
it's the meme from Always Sunny in Philadelphia with all of the moving parts.
Yes, for sure. I've seen that a few times.
So the Rossini was with the Athletic just for a couple of years, having joined from ESPN beforehand, but I remember seeing a few things that came out, and I think you've been on the case, pulling tweets that were since deleted, which we'll get to in a second. But one of the interesting things, before that, she was with ESPN, and from 2015 until 2023. But in there was the whole the ability that she got, and I don't remember the exact timing of this, but she was able to get a couple of coaches to speak on the record, and it even caused someone else in the media to say, "Boy, Dianna Russini has this knack for getting really good interviews because nobody else can get these interviews." And that
Yeah.
happened while she was at ESPN. But if we're following the timeline of things that were dropped, there was a March 2020 photo drop involving the two of them. So it kind of asks whether or not there was a conflict of interest in the way that she was able to get her information from her sources.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go back to the first thing that you said, which is people kind of questioning and talking about sort of her reputation, if you will. So, what I believe you were alluding to was a Steve Levy tweet. Steve Levy, longtime ESPN personality, said on Twitter, and this is still available. This isn't deleted. You can find it. I was the first person to kind of unearth it. He said, good job on Samantha Ponder, another female ESPN personality. Good job on Samantha Ponder for pointing out how Dianna Russini was able to get a nearly impossible interview with two head coaches, Mike Vrabel being one of them, and then the Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin being the other one during COVID. We had these crazy protocols, remember, where you had to stand a certain amount of feet away and stuff. Very tough to get interviews. So Steve Levy pointed this out, and he didn't point it out, it didn't appear to me, to say, good job, Dianna Russini, because he never really congratulated Dianna Russini in a tweet. He congratulated Sam Ponder for pointing out how nearly impossible it was. So that's two ESPN employees saying, wow, Dianna Russini was able to get these nearly impossible interviews. And I speculated that may have been sort of a dog whistle tweet, that certain people in the inner circle might know what he meant by that. Like, oh, how were you able to do that, Dianna Russini? And that's speculation on my part. I'm not certain about it. But that when I wrote that up, it got about 4 million views. I know Steve Levy had to see it, and he hasn't responded to that. ESPN hasn't responded to that. So that was a pretty fascinating angle. But another thing that's interesting about this, when we bring this up, is it is evidence, in my opinion, that ESPN benefited from this alleged affair. If two of their employees are saying Dianna Russini was able to get a nearly impossible interview with Mike Vrabel, and the timeline, as you alluded to, matches up with when we know she was hanging out with Mike Vrabel, to me, that illustrates that ESPN benefited from this relationship. And then my next question is, did ESPN know? Did they knowingly benefit or did they unknowingly benefit? I think that's a fair question to ask.
And there's another element here about The Athletic, which is doing an investigation of this investigation of their employee and whether or not there was something improper is still going on, and it is going to take some time. You had two elements of this that I wanted to get to, and you've tweeted about both of them. One was the fact that there is the possibility that there is equipment, such as a laptop, etc., that have now entered the mix because Russini's work relationship with The Athletic would have had company computers above and beyond a phone. So that's something that could be investigated more thoroughly. The other interesting thing here is you posted this, and I'm going to read from my screen, on transparency, the transparency policy of The Athletic, and they said, and you tweeted this: when reporting and writing stories, we do not have an agenda, and it is important that our readers understand that. To maintain the highest form of authority, we should avoid even the appearance of a conflict of interest and reveal those sources or affiliations that may put into question our ability to be credible. So, yeah, that seems really possibly odd here.
Yeah, that was sort of her handbook, if you will, her guidelines that she was supposed to follow. And let me add, as a former journalist myself, those are pretty standard. It's not like The Athletic has these crazy high expectations and journalists in other places could get away with that. That's sort of, no journalist is surprised to hear that those were sort of the standards that Dianna Russini was supposed to follow. And I think, I've never spoken to Dianna Russini, but I think she'd agree with me and perhaps say, like, yeah, every journalist knows this is sort of, you're not supposed to get too close to your sources. You can't have conflicts of interest. You can't buy things. You can't pay for gifts for your sources, those sort of things. It's sort of common sense in the journalism field. So this is, I believe, the expectations that the Athletic is going to be following and looking into as it's doing this investigation. And the Athletic has come out and clarified and said, we're not looking into her conduct. We're looking into the journalism aspect of this. Pro Football Talk came out and said, well, they're kind of the same thing. There's a lot of overlap in a situation like this where there's potentially meetings apparently going on, outside of work hours, around midnight in a New York City bar, although that was with ESPN, but you get my point here. And so, that's sort of, I got that tweet that you just shared from a link from the Pro Football Talk article. So if anybody wants to look into that, because it's a whole long document, and I just posted an excerpt of it, but there's a lot more to it.
And there's something interesting you said there about, Russini is supposed to not buy gifts or not use gifts to curry favor, but it does, and I know this from my corporate public relations days, it does go the other direction too. You cannot violate integrity as a journalist by accepting lavish gifts, and in some parts, like maybe outside of sports journalism, maybe travel writers would have to say, look, they put me up for the weekend and they flew me here and they showed me the sights, but I'm still going to give you an unbiased view of the destination or whatever. But I think that's an important distinction too, because this does potentially go both ways. And there was a deleted tweet that you found about the player Morgan Moses. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that is related possibly to a conflict of interest?
Yeah, for sure. Before I get into the Morgan Moses thing, I just want to put a bow on what we were talking about the gifts, because the Sedona resort that they were pictured at in Arizona, I went on their website, and that costs about $2,000 a night to stay there. It's a very luxurious resort. So that's one of the questions I've been asking, is who paid for that? Because if Dianna Russini paid for it with her own money, that, as we saw from the athletic standards, that's a problem. If Mike Vrabel happened to be the one that pays for that, in my opinion, that's another conflict of interest on his end, because he's a coach of the year. He just won coach of the year, and she's one of 50 Associated Press coach of the year voters. So just wanted to put a bow on why that's so important about the gifts and who paid, because I've been asking that question. And a lot of people are like, Tony, I don't understand what the big deal is. Why are you asking that question? And that's why, because it seems like no matter how you slice it, someone messed up, and this is being investigated. We should sort of know who broke their own company's policies, et cetera, et cetera. But the Morgan Moses thing that you brought up, I think, is one of the more fascinating aspects of this case, because in 2025, Dianna Russini posted a photograph of former New York Jets offensive lineman Morgan Moses with a little tiny logo of the New England Patriots on it. And she was talking about how the following day free agency was going to open, and she was referring to Morgan Moses's free agency. Well, the very next day, Morgan Moses was signed by the New England Patriots, okay? The very next day was the first day of free agency. In other words, the day she originally posted it with that Patriots icon, the Patriots were not allowed to have contact with Morgan Moses or any other free agent in the NFL. So it appeared that Dianna Russini had inside information from someone in the Patriots organization. We now know she's very close to Mike Vrabel. So it's possible and theoretical that she received information from Mike Vrabel or someone else in the Patriots organization that the Patriots were going to sign Morgan Moses. That's a big deal, because if it happened that way, she would have received that information during the no tampering portion of the offseason. In other words, Dianna Russini would have had evidence that the Patriots tampered and broke an NFL rule. Tampering is a very big deal in the NFL. You can go back to the Dolphins, the Falcons. They've both been penalized big time, draft picks, fines, etc., for tampering. Dianna Russini deleted this tweet in 2025, and people noticed at the time. Journalists noticed. A lot of Jets fans noticed. A lot of Eagles fans noticed. And started saying, whoa, this appears to be a tampering thing. The NFL didn't look into it. And I've been one of the ones to go back and say, you know what? If the NFL had taken this concern a little more seriously, maybe they would have found evidence of a Russini Mike Vrabel relationship before the Sedona pictures even came out. Fans were screaming at the top of their lungs in 2025, tampering, tampering, tampering. And the NFL seemingly ignored it. Maybe there was some sort of investigation internally that I'm unaware of. I don't know. Dianna Russini's side of this, I think it's important to sort of present both sides. Dianna Russini's side of this is she said that her graphics team, I didn't know Dianna Russini had a graphics team. We'll let people judge for themselves on that. But she said her graphics team made a mistake, and New England Patriots begins with an N, and NFL begins with an N. And on their software, those two logos were next to each other. So her graphics person accidentally put the wrong logo. She didn't have any inside information. That's her perspective on it. Now, I can sit here today and say, you know what? That's actually a plausible explanation. I'm not 100% sure that did or didn't happen. But I'm like, wouldn't the NFL at least want to look into that? Like, just ask some follow-up questions. Dianna, can you show me the software? Like those common
Right.
sense types of questions to sort of vet her excuse. I don't believe that happened. I don't think that took place, and I'm curious why the NFL wasn't more curious.
And I want to get back to the investigation that the Athletic is undertaking because they're saying it's going to take more time, and I think you posted it might take a few more weeks. What happens after they close the investigation? What is, I guess, the bigger picture question around covering the NFL, reporting on the NFL, journalism that impacts the day to day of what is a 24/7 365 league. Once this investigation is closed and the findings are released, then what?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Let's start with the timeline here. Originally, I was told a little more than 2 weeks ago, a couple more weeks. So I think it's fair to say any day now. I wouldn't be surprised to see this investigation come out this week. I wouldn't be surprised to see it come out next week. Um, I would be a little surprised if it was more than that based on the timeline that I heard. And I heard that timeline from a Kansas City Chiefs reporter. I tweeted this out. He heard it from a colleague, he said, who worked at the Athletic. So I'm feeling pretty good about that timeline. Of course, there can always be delays and stuff, but just FYI on that. In terms of what happens next, it's a great question. I think it depends on the context of what comes out. Like, it's possible this is a nothing burger. It's possible there's nothing in there. It's possible Dianna Russini didn't do anything wrong. It's possible that the Athletic says that Dianna Russini didn't do anything wrong. And if that happens, I guess the answer is nothing. Nothing really happens. And it might actually help put this story to bed and put some closure on this story. However, if there are bombshells in this story, and I think that that's possible, you have former NFL offensive lineman and ESPN employee Mark Schlereth coming out and saying he thinks the entire league is nervous about this investigation. So it's plausible that there might be something big in here. If that happens, I think it could reignite this story. To answer your question about what happens next, I think that this is a point in the offseason where there's not a lot going on, right? Like, training camp's a few weeks away. Like, the draft is over. There's sort of a lull. And if there happens to be some big stories, some scandals, etc., within this, I think it could reignite the story. The other thing that it does, I think the question that's on a lot of people's mind is, when does Dianna Russini speak? Because she hasn't spoken very recently at all. We had those public statements, photos of her in public, but she hasn't said much. It's potentially possible that this could trigger a response from her. That the investigation comes out, says something about her that she doesn't like, that she wants to clarify, or perhaps, this is total speculation on my part, perhaps she's planning to speak already, but wants the investigation to come out because she's not sure what is going to come out. You know what I'm saying? You don't want to come out and make a statement and say, here's what happened, here's my side of the story, and then have an investigation come out 2 weeks later and contradict you. So I think it just logically makes sense to me in my mind that the investigation would need to happen first before she speaks.
One of the things I also wonder about is how the perception of I'm trying to choose my words carefully, but the perception of male female dynamics in covering sports, how that potentially changes as a result, because there's an obvious element of sex appeal that Dianna Russini had and has, and that may be something that she has been able to. It's helped her in her career, being attractive, right? But you do ask the question as to whether this would then kind of blow the doors off of the whole industry when it comes to the perception of men and women working together in athletics, women covering men's sports, when you've got the element of sex thrown in.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think it's human nature when a story like this comes out, when we learn that a female reporter who has a Coach of the Year vote had some sort of a connection with an NFL coach who won Coach of the Year and who she was covering his stories very closely. I think it's human nature to wonder, how often is this happening? Is this the only time in NFL history that this has ever happened? Or are there other cases? Unfortunately, there are obviously a lot of female reporters who have done nothing wrong and who are great at their jobs and who are acting completely ethically. They're following those guidelines we talked about, the ethical guidelines that The Athletic puts out. They're doing all that stuff right. I think it's unfortunate for them that people might be second guessing them and saying, wow, this is an attractive sideline reporter. This is an attractive personality on ESPN. I bet they're doing this too. I bet they're not really as good at their job and they're just getting by because of their looks, etc. And I think that's a sad fallout from this story, because that stereotype existed before Dianna Russini was ever reporting. That idea was there. And I think that this story, unfortunately, has poured some gasoline on that, for sure.
Yeah, and to your point, you don't want to put everyone in the same camp.
Yeah,
And
that's unfair.
what
Yep.
Russini has done here is caused some people to ask questions about those that you should not ask questions about. I mean, in the industry, there are some really standout reporters and journalists and women that are working in this field that are 100%. Everything's above board. They do their work. They do the homework. And the unfortunate thing about this is, unless Russini is completely cleared of any wrongdoing by the athletic investigation, there's still going to be those who will ask the questions, put the asterisk on the reporter, and it's unnecessary to do that in the vast majority of the cases.
Yeah, for sure. And two things I'll add real quick on this topic is Dianna Russini did a interview with a radio station. I wish I could remember which one, but I've seen the video with my own eyes. And they introduced her, and she said, I'm going to paraphrase here, but she said at the very beginning of this interview, I don't want to be introduced as insider or NFL reporter. I want to be introduced as MILF. And a lot of people know what that's slang for and what that stands for. That was before this scandal broke. And I think comments like that, in my opinion, can have the effect of also undermining women in the field. And so I just want to throw that out there. I thought that was interesting because that took place well before this relationship was uncovered. And the other piece that I'll mention is Chrissy Freud, another NFL reporter who was fired by the USA Today after she criticized Dianna Russini. I wouldn't say criticized Dianna Russini, after she was commenting about Dianna Russini's fire or resignation, excuse me. Chrissy, who knows better than me, has alleged that this sort of thing with a female reporter and a male member of the NFL, not necessarily all head coaches, has happened at least 6 times that she's aware of and that she's heard of. So I just wanted to add that in there as well in case anybody wants to go down any other rabbit holes out there on this topic.
And I actually did write down Chrissy Freud on my list of notes, because what's interesting about her is I believe she wants to put this story to rest. and she's being very careful about who she speaks with on podcast circuits and interview circuits and the like. But she's also, while she is working as a journalist, she's going to law school. So I can applaud her for having her head screwed on somewhat straight here. It appears, because I don't think she wanted to be considered part of this story. I think she wanted to make her comments, say her piece, and then move on. And then that was not possible after she was
Yeah,
let go.
there's been a lot of attacks. I mean, even I don't want to make this about me and a sob story about me, but even just me covering this story, I've been attacked in a lot of different ways, threats, doxing, that sort of stuff. And I kind of put out a prediction out there when Chrissy first started speaking up, like, this could get ugly for her in terms of how she's going to be treated by other people. And I think we've seen that come to fruition. The comments that I've read are just, a lot of them are really, really ugly toward her online. It's sad to see.
Yeah, this is it's really an unfortunate story, in what I think could have been otherwise a pretty somewhat positive, fascinating off season. I wanted so let's shift gears and talk about the off season a little bit, if we can. I just saw a piece break before we started about the NFL saying that the supplemental draft will not take place, and this has a really big impact on college sports, because Brendan Sorsby from Texas Tech, who used to be at Cincinnati, um, has the gambling issue, and Texas Tech was going full throttle, saying we're going to get that fixed, and we're not worried about it. And then Sorsby said he was going to enter the supplemental draft. Now Sorsby's opportunity to get in the NFL doesn't come until 2027. So now what?
Yeah, that's a tough one. This isn't my area of expertise, but I was kind of assuming that there was going to be a supplemental draft, and you're actually breaking the news to me now. So that's obviously bad news for him to put his NFL career on hold. The college NCAA is not a big fan of his right now, so he's kind of in a little bit of a limbo right now. And as NFL teams are evaluating him in the future, you have to take into consideration a rust factor if he's not going to play for a whole year. And you got to imagine that can only hurt his stock and can't help his stock. If he was staying in college and playing a full season and all that, you could argue he'd put good tape together and could make himself an even better draft pick. But now it looks like this is really bad news for him.
Yeah, and again, this was just breaking, right before we began this chat, which was 1 o'clock Central Time. We started this and you're out in a different time zone. And one of the things that you do in your other time zone is, well, you do two things. So tell me first of all about the 49ers work that you've been doing and what you're seeing from the Niners in the offseason.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm basically a Niner fan. I used to be a sports writer, and I had, the lucky, fortunate circumstance to be able to cover a couple NFL games. But I'm not a beat writer, so I want to clarify that. I think a lot of people assume that I am. So really, more accurately, I'm just a fan covering the 49ers. And in terms of their offseason, it's been fascinating with the Brandon Ayuk developments. Um, this is somebody who's really been a thorn in the side for the 49ers. After the Super Bowl against the Chiefs, immediately sort of being passive aggressive on social media about his usage in the Super Bowl. You had the shorts incident where he wore the wrong shorts to practice and forced Kyle Shanahan to call him out for that. You have all these social media videos, the one of him speeding past the stadium in Santa Clara, which now there's a warrant out for his arrest because of that. And a lot of drama with Brandon Ayuk, and unfortunately, it's sort of hogged the space for 49ers news this offseason. It's like, we got to get rid of Brandon Ayuk in order to actually talk about how the 49ers offseason's going. I think generally speaking, 49er fans are pretty disappointed with the NFL draft. Their first round pick or second round pick, as they traded out, Stribling, a lot of people feel like he was a reach. The running back in the third round. I think a lot of people are optimistic that he can be a number 2 running back behind Christian McCaffrey, but the 49ers also have a history of swinging and missing on running backs in the NFL draft under the Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch era. So 49er fans like myself are optimistic. With this team, though, it always comes down to injuries, man. Like, they've been so snake bit by injuries the last couple of years, whether it's George Kittle, Fred Warner, Nick Bosa, Brock Purdy at times last season with a toe. I mean, this team has just been injury prone, and that is probably going to determine their season is how healthy they are.
The other big thing that you do is the Last Men pod. So tell me how that came about, and tell me what you talk about on that one.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first, kudos to you for saying it right, because it used to be called the Last Man Standing podcast. I changed it to Last Men, and most people still say Last Man, even though the name's been changed. So kudos to you for nailing that. You must be detail-oriented. But what that does is it covers NFL Survivor pools. So in a nutshell, an NFL Survivor pool is a gambling opportunity where you start with one team in week 1. You pick one team that you think is going to win, not against the spread. If they win, you advance to week 2. If they lose, you're done. If they win, you advance to week 2, but you're not allowed to use that team anymore. So it requires a lot of strategy. You can't burn all the good playoff teams early on, because then later in the season, you're just going to be using a crappy team to try to win. So we specifically cover Circa Survivor, which is the largest NFL Survivor pool in the world. $20 million guaranteed. It's a $1,000 entry. So you can imagine the momentum swings in this. It's a roller coaster all season long. If you go 20-0, and I say 20-0 because you got to go 18-0, but then there's 2 separate weeks that are pulled out for Thanksgiving and Christmas. So you got to plan strategy-wise and leave some Thanksgiving teams and some Christmas teams. If you go 20-0, you get that $20 million prize pool. If 3 people end the season, 3 people will split that $20 million. So it's an opportunity to turn $1,000 into $20 million. And one of the things that I like best about it is, on Saturday night who everybody's on. So I'm watching the games on Sunday, and let's say I picked the 49ers. I'm obviously rooting for the 49ers, but I also know 29% of the field is on the Chiefs, let's say, and 36% of the field is on the Chargers. So I'm obviously rooting for them to lose as well. So it makes Sunday a lot more fun, because practically every game you're watching has some sort of Survivor implications. So me and my co-host, Jason Anik, he's the twin brother of John Anik from the UFC. We dive deep into every game every week from a Circa Survivor perspective, and it's kind of got a cult following. If you're not into NFL Survivor pools, you might be able to glean a little bit of information about each game from the show as we handicap each game, but it's really for people that are kind of obsessed with Survivor pools like we are.
Let's dig in on that, because how long have you been doing this podcast?
I've been heavily involved in Survivor pools for about 5 years. And the podcast is 2 years old, so we're heading into year 3. The first year I did it with former NFL player Ryan Hogue. He was Mr. Irrelevant many years ago. He was my co-host the first year. And then now I've got Jason to work with this year. So our audience really blew up and exploded between year 1 and year 2. So I'm super excited to see what year 3 is going to look like.
And what happened with the pool last year? Did anybody go 20-0? How interesting did it get in the last few seasons?
Oh, man.
Or few weeks?
It was so interesting. So we went into the Thanksgiving slate. In this pool, Thanksgiving's always like a big milestone, right? Because you've got 3 Thanksgiving games and then a Black Friday game. So you've got to pick one of these 8 teams, and you got to strategize and choose one of these 8 teams. So we get to Thanksgiving. There's 900 people left. And if you guys remember Thanksgiving last year, it was all underdogs that won. The Cowboys upset the Chiefs, for instance. The Eagles on Black Friday lost to the Bears. So underdogs went 4-0 and knocked the pool from, that's when I got eliminated, by the way. It started with about 18,000 entries. We got down to 900 by Thanksgiving. And then on Thanksgiving, because of all those upsets, I don't remember the exact number that was left, but it was like 48 or something. Like 900 down to, yeah. Wow. It was insane. We call that carnage. When that happens in Survivor pools, when there's a big week where just everybody seems to lose, we call that the carnage week. And one other game that I'll highlight for people out there that might remember this. Do you happen to remember week 5 Cardinals Titans. The Amari DiMercato game where he fumbled right before the goal line.
Oh
Do you
yeah.
remember that one? Yeah. So that was another big one that knocked out a bunch of people. Can you imagine, Dave? You've got this $1,000 entry. You've survived to week 5. You're dreaming of winning $20 million. Your Cardinals, who you had the guts to take, because remember, the Cardinals aren't an elite team. You took them because they were going against the bad Titans. You took a risk. Your Cardinals are up by whatever it was, 3 touchdowns, DeMercado fumbles. That epic, ridiculous comeback is how your Circa Survivor life ended. That's a tough way to go out in Survivor pools. Yeah, you could make a movie about that, and you'd say that wasn't realistic. It was pretty wild.
So we're talking the typical number of entries is 18,000 ish, and then you got so last year it got knocked down to let's say 40 or so after Black Friday games, and then then those that were left had to bet on the Sunday games. That was
Yep.
a separate slate.
Yep. Yeah, we call that like week 13A and B. It's like, oh, thank God you got through Thanksgiving. Now make a decision real quick in like 2 days. It's
Right.
almost Sunday. Yeah, exactly.
And you can't pick who you've picked already at any point in the season, and you also have to realize that you've got a few more weeks left after Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
So when you got to the last couple weeks of the season, what happened?
So I was out at Thanksgiving, but for those people, it gets really interesting, Dave, because let me put this to you this way. I don't know how interested you are in sports betting, but let's just say a theoretical example. You're alive in week 18. You need one more game to win, okay? And I'm the only other one in the contest. It's me versus you for $20 million. So either I'm going to lose and you're going to win and you're going to get all 20, or I'm going to win, you're going to lose, I'm going to get all 20, or we both win and we both lose, and then we split it and get 10 million each, right? Let's pretend that we're in that situation. What you can do at this point is you can call up a rich uncle or brother or take out a line of credit or whatever, right? And say, if I win, I'm going to get $20 million or $10 million. So I now want to put a bet, we call this a hedge, on the other side. So you create a win-win scenario for yourself, right? If you can somehow get a hold of $1 million, right? If the 49ers win, I'm going to win either 10 or 20, depending if I split it with Tony or if I win the whole thing. Or if the 49ers lose, I'm going to put $1 million on the underdog at 3-1, and I'm going to win $3 million. So now I've got a situation where I'm either going to win $3 million and lose my $1,000 entry, right? But win $3 million, or win 20 or 10 million and then lose my $1 million hedge. So you can create yourself a win-win scenario. So the example that I just gave was like a really crystallized version just to sort of explain the concept of hedging. But you could also hedge in week 17 leading up to week 18, depending on how many people are left and stuff like that. So that's something. The contest changes, to answer your question, after Thanksgiving, because you have to start thinking about that sort of stuff. There's also deals that take place. In that scenario where you and I are live in week 18, I could call you up and say, hey, Dave, let's make a deal. And we got to get this in writing with lawyers, etc. These things happen in this contest. There's a history of that. So I call, hey, Dave, how about you and I each get $1 million, no matter who wins? So I'm agreeing that if I win and you lose, I'm going to give you $1 million and vice versa. And then we just play for the rest. That we call that a save. So there's a chop, which poker players are probably familiar with, where you make an agreement like that. Then there's a save where you agree to split a certain portion of the pool and play for the rest. So things get wild after Thanksgiving because those sorts of conversations start happening. This year, the Casino Circa has guaranteed, and I don't work for them, by the way, but they've guaranteed $20 million. That means theoretically, of course this won't happen, but if only $1 million worth of people sign up, the casino is going to lose $19 million in this contest. It's a no-rake contest, which means the casino doesn't directly get any money from the prize pool. Of course, they get money because people visit the casino and hang out and buy drinks and that sort of stuff, right? But none of the money from the pool is raked out and given to the casino. So $20 million guarantee. It could be more, though. If 25,000 people sign up, we're going to have $25 million that we're playing for. So it's an exciting ride for sure.
And then one last note, I guess. Outside of everything that's been talked about with Russini and Vrabel, when it comes to teams in the offseason and all of that, um, in addition to your 49ers, who do you have your finger on the pulse of? Who do you think has made the biggest strides in the offseason? Who might surprise that we aren't expecting to surprise?
Let me start with the first part of that. You can't have this conversation without the Rams. I mean, them acquiring Myles Garrett, when you've got a veteran leader like Matthew Stafford, Puka Nacua on one side of the ball, and then Myles Garrett on the other side of the ball, I think the Rams are going to be a handful. As a 49er fan, I hated that move because I know he's going to be a nightmare for that 49ers offensive line. But when you're looking for a dark horse, I think about a team like the Giants. I like John Harbaugh a lot. I have a lot of respect for that guy. I think Jackson Dart is certainly has a very high ceiling for potential. We'll see how Scatabo comes back in terms of how healthy he is. But Malik Neighbors, and they drafted pretty well too, in my opinion. I think the Giants are a team that people might be overlooking right now because you look at that NFC East. Who do you think of right away? It's the Eagles, right? Cowboys are always kind of in the conversation because they can have an explosive offense with those receivers. And then people are talking about the Commanders a lot because, hey, Jaden Daniels is back. Remember him? I mean, remember how explosive that guy was before he got hurt? I mean, so I feel like people are sleeping on the Giants and just sort of assuming that this is a fourth place team. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Giants win 8 or 9 games this year. I really wouldn't.
Tony Farmer, who is the guy behind the Last Men pod, also on YouTube, Tony Talks 49ers, and the guy on and what's your Twitter handle or your X handle?
Yeah, it's at Tony's Market Tips, and the podcast is at Last Men Pod on X.
So if you want all of the information on Vrabel and Russini and its impact in the NFL, there's probably nobody who's studied it more, I think, than Tony Farmer. Tony, thanks for your time today. We really appreciate it.
That was a lot of fun, Dave. Thanks for having me.